Parsha is Parsha's Tetze. If you have a Chumash and you'd like to follow along, I'm going to begin at the beginning of Perek Chof Daled, more than halfway through the Parsha. Perek Chof Daled, Pasuk Aleph. I thought that this would be an interesting topic because usually we talk about marriage and relationships, rosy romantic things, and today we'll talk about divorce. I thought it would be a fresh change. Perek Chof Daled, Pasuk Aleph. Says the Torah, in Chamishi, in the fifth aliyah of this week's Parsha, Parsha's Tetze. Ki yikach ish isha uva'ola. If a man takes a woman and they get married, they live together as husband and wife. V'hoyo, and it shall be, im loy timtza chen be'einav, if she no longer finds favor or grace in his eyes. Ki motza bo ervas dovar, because he has found in her a matter of promiscuity. V'chosav lo sefer krisus, the Torah says, he shall write for her a document of severance, a book of divorce. V'nosan beyodo, and he shall place it in her hands. He, the man, shall place this sefer krisus, what we call today a get. He shall place this get into her hands. By the way, if you've ever seen an actual giving of a get, the rabbi who is officiating the giving of the get, the rabbi who is facilitating the get, will actually make sure that the woman's hands are open, and the man puts the get directly into the woman's hands, as the pasuk says, "V'nosan biyoda," he shall place it in her hands. Today's shiur, I forgot to mention, you'll forgive me. Today's shiur is dedicated in honor of Mrs. Dina Gress's mother, Liba Bas Avraham. Liba Bas Avraham, Mrs. Guggenheim, whose yahrzeit is on the 11th of Elul. May her neshama have an aliyah. And all Yidden may be blessed with a Yeshua and all the wonderful brachas that they need. Thank you for the reminder. So the Torah says that if the woman no longer finds favor in her husband's eyes, he may write for her a document of divorce, place it in her hands, v'shilcha mibeisoi, and send her out of his home. Pasuk Beis, v'yotza mibeisoi, she left his home, v'holcha, and she went, v'hoisa li'ish acher, and she married another man. Quote, usaneya ho'isha achra, in Pasuk Gimel, the second man that she married despises her. He hates her. V'chosav lo sefer krisus, and he writes for her a document of divorce, a document of severance, v'nosan biyoda, and places it in her hands, v'shilcha mibeisai, and sends her out of his home. Or perhaps the second man she marries passes, asher l'kocha lo l'isha, who married her. Her second husband either divorces her or passes. Either way, concludes the Torah, lo yuchal baila harishon asher shilcha loshuv lekachta. Her original husband may never take her back as a wife, liyos lo l'isha, and marry her. Once a woman has gotten divorced and married a second man, whether her second marriage ends with the second husband passing or whether it ends in divorce, either way, the Torah says there is a biblical prohibition. The woman may not remarry her original husband. The Torah says this would be considered tamei, this would be considered impure. No reason here is given here in the Torah other than the Torah saying, ki to'eva, this would be considered a to'eva, this would be considered an erva. Other than that, the Torah says once her marriage with the second husband ends, again, either with a decease, with the second husband passing, or with the second husband divorcing her, either way, she may not go back to her first original husband. All right, as far as we're concerned right now, that's the piece, the couple of psukim that we're going to quote. Now, these verses, these psukim become the source for the concept in general of divorce, where the Torah recognizes that under certain circumstances, a husband and wife, despite having entered into a kosher marriage, Kedas Moshe v'Yisrael, despite having promised each other in sickness and in health, till death do us part, not the not the Torah way, not the Torah language, but despite the man having said to the woman, Harayat mekudeshesli, and despite their best of intentions, sometimes it happens that a couple must get divorced and go their own separate ways. These psukim, these verses become the source for how this is done. How does this divorce take place? A document, the Torah calls it a sefer krisus, a document is written today, we call it a get, is written. The man places it in the woman's hands, and the woman is free. She may go off and marry someone else once she has received this document. There are many details, there are many halachas involved with this. An entire tractate of Mishnah and Gemara is dedicated to this. The tractate is called Masechta Gittin. Today I'm going to study with you just a couple of lines from the last Mishnah in Masechta Gittin. This is Masechta Gittin Daf Tzadik Amud Aleph, the last Mishnah. In this Mishnah you have three opinions as to at which point a husband and wife, according to the Torah, are entitled to cut their ties and move on in their own separate ways. At which point does the Torah, so to speak, sanction the decision for husband and wife to get divorced? Here you have three opinions. And would you believe it? All three of them argue. Beis Shammai Oimrim, says the Mishnah, based on the school of Shammai taught, Lo yegarish odom es ishtoi elo im kein motza bo dvar erva. A man should not or may not divorce his wife unless he has found in her a matter of promiscuity, the likes of which creates a halachic prohibition against him and her remaining married. Only according to Beis Shammai, under those circumstances, may husband and wife get divorced. Lo yegarish odom es ishtoi. A man may not divorce. Yes, the Torah gives us a Parshas Gittin. The Torah gives us a Parsha of divorce. But this, says Beis Shammai, applies, is applicable only if the husband and wife, only if their marriage has descended to a place where it is halachically forbidden for them to remain married. Ki motza bo dvar erva, because the woman has committed a sin which makes it prohibited for the two of them to stay married. Where do we get this halacha from? Our pasuk in Parshas Tetze, Shenemar, because the pasuk says, quote Beis Shammai, Perak Chavdalet pasuk Aleph, Ki motza bo ervas dovar. He has found in her a matter of promiscuity. Then and only then does the Torah dictate the Parsha of Gerushin, the Parsha of divorce. All right. Then the Mishnah gets even more interesting. Well, Beis Hillel Oimrim, the school of Hillel said, nah, you don't have to wait until the marriage descends to a level with its promiscuity and a halachic prohibition for them to stay married. It doesn't have to get that bad. Quote, Afilu hikdichot havshiloi. Even if she burned his food, he may divorce her. Even if she burned his dinner, she burned the cholent, or she burned the kishka, or she burned the kugel, or whatever it is, he may divorce her. Shenemar, how do we know this? Beis Hillel learned it from the same words in the pasuk, Ki motza bo ervas davar, because he's found in her ervas davar. Where do you see this in the pasuk? Says Beis Hillel, the Torah doesn't just say Ki motza bo erva, he's found in her promiscuity. Ki motza, the Torah adds the word davar. He's found in her promiscuity, davar, a matter. The extra word davar, according to Beis Hillel, teach us that it doesn't have to be something as severe as promiscuity. Any davar, any matter, even a burned dinner, is sufficient grounds for the two of them to get divorced. And now, the strangest part of the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva Omer. Rabbi Akiva has a third opinion. Afilu motza acheres noe heimeno. Even if he finds another woman more beautiful than his wife, this alone, this is sufficient grounds for divorce. So even if he's walking down the street and he sees someone else, another woman more beautiful than his wife, voila, says Rabbi Akiva, he may go home and take her to Bezdin and give her a get and send her on her merry way. How do we know that? Shenemar, v'hoya im loy simtza chen be'enav. Wait a second, says Rabbi Akiva, you're all jumping to the second half of the pasuk, ki motza bo'er v'asdavar, but there's some words before that. The Torah says, v'hoyo im lo yisimtza chen be'einav, it shall be if she doesn't find favor in his eyes, if he doesn't see grace in her, he may divorce her. The end of the pasuk concludes. So Rabbi Akiva says it's sufficient that he sees another woman more beautiful than his wife for him to divorce her and to send her on her merry way. This is the end of the last Mishnah in Masechta Gittin. And of course, the Mishnah is incredibly difficult to understand. First of all, what really does the Mishnah mean when the Mishnah talks about at which point there's three opinions at which point a man can divorce his wife? What if none of these three things apply? A husband and wife don't halachically have the right to call it quits and go their separate ways? What if both husband and wife wake up one morning and for whatever reason, they decide their marriage has come to an end and it's time to separate and go their own separate ways? What, you need some kind of heter? You need some kind of permission? Beis Shammai says you have to wait till she does something promiscuous. Beis Hillel says you have to wait till she burns his dinner. Rabbi Akiva says you have to wait till you see another woman more beautiful. What if none of these three things apply? Then what? Then they're not allowed to get divorced? Question number one. Question number two, the opinion of Beis Hillel is very difficult to understand. If it is necessary for there to be grounds for divorce, okay, so she burned his dinner. So what? That's grounds for divorce? Because she burned his dinner? And what if she wasn't the one who was making dinner? He was the one making dinner, and he burned her dinner. Is that grounds for divorce? What if every other night of the week she doesn't burn his dinner, and tonight she does? So now what? Now he has to take her to Beis Din and divorce her? What if he doesn't want to divorce her because she burns his dinner? Does that mean that he has to divorce her? In Beis Shammai's case, when he finds something promiscuous in her activity, in many cases, halachically, he may not choose to remain married to her. He has to divorce her. Does Beis Hillel mean that if she burns his food, he has to divorce her? Does Beis Hillel mean he's allowed to divorce her? What if he doesn't want to? What if she doesn't want to? And what in heaven's name does burning food have anything to do with this? And then, of course, the most difficult part of this to understand, the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, Ribono Shel Olam. I mean, for God's sake, he sees another woman more beautiful than his wife. That's it. Off he goes to Beis Din. Here you go, honey. Here's a get. The woman who lives next door or down the road is more beautiful than you. Seid gesund. That seems to be preposterous, ridiculous, insensitive, cruel, impractical. What does this even mean? All right. The commentaries have much to say about this Mishnah. Needless to say, we're not going to be able to get through all of the opinions. We're not going to be able to get through all of the interpretations. But perhaps some of them, we can glean some insights or one or two ideas. So here it is. Point one. All opinions agree from a halachic perspective, all three opinions, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and Rabbi Akiva, all three agree on this point. All three agree that there need to be grounds for divorce. There need to be grounds for divorce. Now, I'm no legal expert, not even close, but to the best of my very limited understanding, this is true even in legal divorce. Even when a couple go through the court system and want to dissolve their marriage, there has to be some type of grounds for divorce. As they say in Yiddish, es kann nicht sein stam. You cannot stam get divorced, right? You can write different things, right? You can, I believe the most famous one is irreconcilable differences, right? Or things of that nature. That's okay. Irreconcilable differences in the legal world, that's sometimes okay. But from a halachic perspective, a couple walk into Beis Din and say, we want to get divorced. Al Pidin, a Rav is not allowed to say, oh, you both want to get divorced? Here you go, here's the document, boom, off you go. Whoa, no, it doesn't work that way. Slow down. There needs to be grounds, reasons for divorce. We don't dissolve a marriage because two of them woke up in a bad mood. Now, maybe there is legitimate reason, maybe there isn't. There are scenarios in which even the Torah recognizes that a marriage needs to be severed, and they both need to go their own way, gesundheit. But before you issue the document, the Torah says, whoa, time out. Don't just give the get. There needs to be a reason. Why are the couple getting divorced? There are unacceptable reasons, and there are acceptable reasons. Again, this is before we get into the three opinions, what Beis Shammai holds, what Beis Hillel holds, etc. This is something that all three opinions agree upon. There are halachically acceptable reasons for divorce, and there are halachically unacceptable reasons for divorce. There are times in the right scenarios where a Beis Din should tell a couple, you know something? Why don't you go try to figure this out first? And then we'll talk about divorce. And then, of course, there are scenarios where a Beis Din shouldn't tell the couple to try to work things out. Beis Din should look at the scenario and say, this is a couple who should get divorced. Years ago, I once heard somebody compare it, Rahman al-Islam, to an amputation. All right, I don't know if the analogy is 100% accurate, but the point that he was trying to make, I believe, is correct. There are cases where Rahman al-Islam, a person needs to have a limb amputated. There are cases where Rahman al-Islam, amputating this particular limb will save the person's life. Yes, in those cases, an amputation is necessary, is important, is life-saving. And one who can do the amputation and refuses to do so may be liable for the person's life. And then there are cases where it's not right just to amputate, where we need to fight to try to find the right cure. Perhaps we can still save the limb. Perhaps we can still save the arm or the leg. One shouldn't rush into amputation if the limb can still be saved. So this is something that all three opinions agree upon. Okay. So what if a couple does walk into Beis Din and they do say, we feel we have grounds for divorce. We'd like to go our two separate ways. What is Beis Din looking for to see in the couple? To what degree does the marriage need to deteriorate? At which point we can say, okay, the couple are free to go. You know, there's the very famous joke about a couple who walk into Beis Din and they want to get divorced. And the Beis Din looks at the couple and they're a little surprised to see a couple at this stage of their life getting divorced. They look like they're already in their senior years. The Beis Din turns to the husband, Rabbi, wie alt seid ihr? How old are you? He says, I'm 97 years old. No, keine Hora bis 120. No, Mrs. Rebbitzin, how old are you? She says, I'm 95 years old. No, keine Hora bis 120. And how long have you been married? 75 years. Beis Din says that sounds wonderful. You sure you want to get? They both shake their head in unison. Absolutely. We want to get divorced. Beis Din says, if it's okay, we have to ask. I mean, you've been together for 75 years. Hashem bless you both. You want to get divorced? And they both look at Beis Din and they say, Moirai v'Rabosai, enough is enough. That's it. Enough is enough. We've had enough. We've lived with each other for 75 years. Shoin genug. All right, be it as it may, different couples have different tolerance levels. But at some point, a marriage has to be dissolved. Beis Shammai say, a marriage should only be dissolved when it gets to a point where there's so much deterioration in the marriage that it's literally halachically forbidden for them to stay together. At that point, we tell them to go. As long as there's a possibility for things to work, as long as there's a chance, as long as they're not halachically forbidden to each other, try to save the marriage. Do everything you can. This is the opinion of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says, even if she burns his food. All right, the commentaries say, what does that mean? Well, it turns out that what that means is she doesn't burn her food by accident, but she burns his food intentionally. She on purpose burns his food. She could have made it taste good. She could have made it delicious. She could have turned off the fire before it burned, but the dafka she didn't. She wanted bedafka, that he should eat black, burned cholent. Dafka. And obviously the commentaries explain the food here is just an analogy. She's not just intentionally burning his food, she's intentionally doing things that will offend him, that will hurt him. She's intentionally trying to afflict her husband, or he is intentionally trying to afflict his wife. Maybe, says Beis Hillel, at this point it's not halachically forbidden for them to live together, but the marriage has descended to the point where they're both intentionally trying to hurt each other. Why did Beis Hillel use the example of burning his food? Maybe because in those days that was the most common example. Maybe because Beis Hillel understood the deep psychological relationship between Jews and food. Maybe Beis Hillel was maybe that was the most common form of abuse in those days. I don't know. But be it as it may, this is the way the commentaries explain. Beis Hillel sees in this an analogy. Beis Hillel sees in this an example of a scenario where a spouse is intentionally hurting the person they're married to. Beis Hillel says, look, at this point, it's permissible to cut the cord and for everybody to go their own way. You don't have to stay in a marriage. This is the opinion of Beis Hillel. You don't have to stay in a marriage if your spouse is intentionally hurting you. You may go. If the marriage is filled with pain to the point where it's intentional, where one spouse feels that the other wakes up in the morning and asks themselves, how can I hurt the man or the woman I'm married to today? At that point, yes, you may go. Okay. Actually, the halacha is like Beis Hillel. It is not necessary for the couple it's not necessary for the husband to find something promiscuous in his wife. If it gets to a point where the marriage is so filled with pain that they're intentionally hurting each other, all right, this is the halacha. Like Beis Hillel says, they may go. Now let's talk about the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says, you can divorce your wife if you find another woman more beautiful than her. All right, what in heaven's name does that mean? Now, people who talk about this Mishnah are very quick to point out that this statement, a man may divorce his wife if he sees another woman more beautiful than his own, would be difficult to understand no matter who said it. But coming from Rabbi Akiva, of all people, Rabbi Akiva, for him to say such a thing makes it all the more preposterous, makes it all the more insanely difficult to understand. Why? First of all, think about the life of Rabbi Akiva. Think about who he was. Who was Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Akiva, until the age of 40, was a shepherd who was illiterate, working for minimum wage. As a shepherd, nobody heard of him. He wasn't particularly known for his yichus or for his kavod. He was a 40-year-old man with a low-paid job and completely ignorant to the point that he was actually illiterate. He worked for a man called Kalba Savua, the details of which are not for right now, but Kalba Savua literally means a satiated dog. Now, what kind of a name is that? The Gemara explains that Kalba Savua was one of the 3 wealthiest men of Yerushalayim. One of the 3 wealthiest men of Yerushalayim. Anybody who came into, and he was one of the most generous men of Yerushalayim. Anybody who walked into his home hungry as a dog would walk out full and satiated. And Kalba Savua, you all know the story, had a beautiful daughter, the apple of his eye, and her name was Rachel. And Rachel could marry Prince Charming on a white horse. Rachel had the pick of the lot. Rachel's father was one of the wealthiest, one of the most influential men in the Jewish community. Rachel could marry whoever she wanted, young and beautiful, promising. She could marry the biggest Talmid Chacham. She could marry the greatest man. She could marry the most studious bocher in Mir. I have to tell you, I read a great story this morning. I know I'm interrupting myself, but I got to tell you, I read a great story. They said there was a man. I'm interrupting. We're going to get back to Kalba Savua in a minute, but I got to tell you this. So there was a man who had a daughter, He lived about, if the story is accurate, lived about 75 years ago. About 70, 75 years ago. Anyways, a man who had a daughter, wealthy man, the apple of his eye, and he wanted a good shidduch for his daughter. So he goes to the Rosh Yeshiva of a particular yeshiva, and he has his eye on a particular boch, on a particular young man. And he says to the Rosh Yeshiva, I heard that this particular man, Yankel, I heard he's an exceptional boch. As it happens, the Rosh Yeshiva did not feel that Yankel was an exceptional bocher at all. He wasn't studious, he wasn't learned, he wasn't wise, he wasn't kind, he wasn't a Baal Midas, he wasn't a mensch. His breath smelled. The Rosh Yeshiva felt that this young man was not going to make a very fine husband at all. But this man, the father of the daughter who came to the Rosh Yeshiva, was so excited about this particular bocher. He goes, Rebbe, I heard about this young man, this Yankel. I heard he's fantastic. Is he a Talmud Chacham? So the Rosh Yeshiva looks at him and goes, is he a Talmud Chacham? Could be better. Could be better. Now note to all of you who are on this call, if any of you ever call me about a shidduch and I say to you the words, could be better, that's not a good thing, okay? I don't mean it in a flattering way. So we're clear? All right. Could be better, says the Rosh Yeshiva. What about his midos? What about his character traits, the father of the girl asks. Is he a mensch? Is he kind? Does he get along well with his fellow man? The Rosh Yeshiva looks at him and goes, could be better. Is he clean? Is he neat? Does he eat like a mensch? Does he dress like a mensch? Does he walk like a mensch? Could be better. Is he responsible? Could be better. Whatever he asked, the Rosh Yeshiva said, could be better. The man walked away and thought to himself, could be better. Of course, could be better. Everyone could be better. Anything could be better. About whom can we not say that so-and-so could be better? Everybody could be better. He decided that this was the Rosh Yeshiva's way of giving him the stamp of approval that he wanted. And the daughter and the young man got married. A couple of weeks later, a month later, they tell the Rosh Yeshiva, this young woman married this young man. And he tells his family members, you see, says the Rosh Yeshiva, when a shidduch is bashert, it's bashert. I know this man, says the Rosh Yeshiva. I know the father of the girl. He's not a stupid man. He's not a silly human being. He's wise. He thinks. He knows to be able to read between the lines. I gave him an answer that wasn't difficult to understand, that there's more to it than this. And yet when a shidduch is bashert, HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes it happen. So back to Kalba Savua, in the case of Rabbi Akiva's, in the case of Kalba Savua's daughter, there was a shidduch which was bashert, and it was between Rachel, Kalba Savua's daughter, and Rabbi Akiva, who at the age of 40 was an ignorant, illiterate shepherd. And they got married. And Kalba Savua was so infuriated. Could you imagine? Could you imagine he has to hang in his living room on top of his fireplace? He has to hang a picture of his daughter's wedding. Which wealthy father doesn't want to hang, which father doesn't want to hang a picture of their daughter's wedding? And he has to stand there next to her while she's married to a shepherd, 40 years old, Weissfun, garnished, that worked for him. He excommunicated his daughter, threw her out of his home, penniless. The Talmud describes Rabbi Akiva and his wife Rachel lived without the most basic human necessities. The daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the Jewish world. His own daughter married a man he didn't approve of, and they lived without the most human basic needs. So angry was Kalba Savua. But Rachel saw potential in her dear husband. And so she sent him off to yeshiva. I'm going to cut through many of the details because you all know the story. 24 years later, Rabbi Akiva returns, the Godel Hadoir, the greatest man of the generation, the greatest Torah scholar. He returns, the Talmud describes, accompanied with 24,000 students. And when his own wife Rachel comes out to greet him after not seeing him for 24 years, her husband, now the greatest man of the generation. And she rushes over to Rabbi Akiva, the frum students, the frumakim, the students of Rabbi Akiva chase her away. A chutzpah, a woman. And Rabbi Akiva said those famous words. He said to his students, to all 24,000 of them, Shali v'shalachem shalahi. Everything I have and everything you have is all really hers. Rabbi Akiva's wife. He gave her a golden crown with the emblem of Yerushalayim. Rabbi Akiva had a beautiful marriage. Perhaps a difficult to understand marriage. But nevertheless, Rabbi Akiva had a beautiful marriage. Rabbi Akiva's wife risked and gave away everything for him, everything. For Rabbi Akiva to then turn around and say, oh, if your wife, if you see another woman more beautiful than your wife, you may divorce her. Rabbi Akiva, of all people, should say a thing like that. How can we possibly understand this? I want to add one more point to the question. I'm sure many of you have been to a Sheva, have been in your lifetime, have been to Sheva Brachas. If you've ever been to a Sheva Brachas, there's one Dvar Torah that gets repeated, may Hashem bless the Jewish people, at every single Sheva Brachas, no exceptions ever. If not repeated at this Sheva Brachas, next Sheva Brachas. If it's not said under the chuppah, it's repeated countless times. And it's a Gemara that says, Ish v'isha zachu shchina shruya b'neihem. If a man and woman merit, the shchina rests between them. Lo zachu, and if they don't merit, they're consumed by fire. Why? Because the word ish is aleph yud shin. The word isha, aleph shin hey, both have the word eish in them, fire. But the ish, the man, has fire and the letter yud, aleph yud shin. The woman has fire and the letter hey. The zachu, if they merit, shchina shruya b'neihem, Hashem's presence rests between them, because the yud of the man and the hey of the woman represent Hashem's presence. Ish v'ishel zachu, if they merit, Hashem's presence rests between them. But if they don't merit, if Hashem's presence is not to be found, all you're left with is eish, fire. And if any of you have been to marriage counseling, you'll know that sometimes marriages can rage like fire. It's a beautiful Dvar Torah, repeated at every single wedding at least once. Guess who is the author of this teaching? Guess who taught this very saying of Chazal? Ish v'isha, if a man and a woman merit, Hashem's presence rests between them. Who do you think is responsible for this teaching? Rabbi Akiva. Of course, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva merited to have such a beautiful marriage with his wife Rachel. They gave away everything for each other. And yet Rabbi Akiva says, if you see another woman more beautiful than your wife, you may divorce her. How can Rabbi Akiva possibly say such a thing? I want to explain it on two levels. The world gives a beautiful explanation for this. They say, no. You're not understanding what Rabbi Akiva is saying, they say. What is Rabbi Akiva saying? You'll forgive me, in a Shiur where I quote Rebbes and Holy Tzaddikim, I'm also going to quote Dennis Prager. I hope you'll be moichel me. Dennis Prager likes to talk about something called missing tile syndrome. What's missing tile syndrome? It says like this: if you walk over to a wall and the wall has hundreds, thousands of tiles, and each tile has a beautiful picture on it. Each tile has a beautiful message on it. But at some point on the wall, there is a tile missing. For whatever reason, Zeicher Lachurban maybe, whatever the reason is, there is a missing tile. Human nature is that rather than notice the hundreds or thousands of beautiful tiles with beautiful pictures and beautiful messages, the human mind's eye goes right for the missing tile, straight, and says, the person will point to it and go, why is there a tile missing here? It's the way our minds work. Our minds go straight to the thing which is missing and say, whoa, what happened here? There's a missing tile. And you say to the person, yes, it's true, there's a missing tile. But in the process of focusing on the missing tile, You've missed all the hundreds of other tiles that are here. The pictures, the messages, the wisdom, the beauty. You're missing it all. Why? Because we're intrigued, we're perturbed, we're grabbed by the missing tile. It fascinates us. Something here is off, something here is wrong. There's something here that's missing, and it's the place our mind naturally gravitates to. And so it is, my dear friends, in human relationships. Every human being has a missing tile. Every human being has deficiencies. Every human being has something wrong with them, because nobody's perfect. What is the difference between, very often, not always, but what is the difference very often between a loving, healthy, vibrant marriage and a Rahman al-Islam, a marriage filled with strife and a marriage filled with pain? It's often all about the missing tile. What do you choose to focus on? What your spouse is or what your spouse isn't? What they have or what they don't? Their advantages or their disadvantages? Their areas of strength or their areas of weakness? The areas in which they shine or the areas in which they fail? Because every human being does both. The only question is, what are you looking for and what are you looking at? This then becomes, the Welt explains, this then becomes the real meaning of what Rabbi Akiva is saying. Rabbi Akiva is saying, you see another woman, and in your mind, in your eyes, she's more beautiful than your wife? Says Rabbi Akiva. You're making a terrible mistake. You're making a very costly mistake. And you're making a very dangerous mistake. You see, the other woman that you're looking at, the other scenario, the other thing that you're looking at, the other wall also has a missing tile. I promise you, there's another missing tile there too. So why is it that the other woman looks more beautiful than your own wife? Well, because in your own wife's case, you're looking at the missing tile. And in the other woman's case, you're looking at the beautiful tile. Says Rabbi Akiva, you see another woman, you find another woman to me to be more beautiful than your own wife. There's something terribly missing in your own marriage. Perhaps the world says Rabbi Akiva is not telling the couple to get divorced. Perhaps Rabbi Akiva is telling them on an emotional level, you're already divorced. Perhaps Rabbi Akiva is not telling the couple to go to Beis Din and the man give his wife a document that says, you are no longer my wife. Perhaps what Rabbi Akiva is saying is, the ship has already sailed, you've missed it. In front of you is standing or sitting a beautiful woman and you're not seeing it. Perhaps Rabbi Akiva is saying every woman deserves to be married to a man who sees in her the most beautiful woman in the world. Every man deserves to be married to a woman who sees in him her Prince Charming, the most beautiful man in the world. And if that isn't there, if that is lacking, says Rabbi Akiva, examine your own perspective, take a step back and ask yourself, Rabbeinu Shalom, what am I looking for and what am I looking at? Don't hold yourselves captive, says Rabbi Akiva. Don't hold yourselves prisoner in a marriage where you don't see greatness and potential in each other, the greatest and the most powerful potential in each other. It was bedafka because of Rabbi Akiva's life and experiences. It was bedafka because Rabbi Akiva was plucked out of obscurity by a woman who saw in him the Godel Hadoir, when nobody saw anything in him other than a shepherd. It was bedafka that taught Rabbi Akiva what a true marriage is. Marry a woman, says Rabbi Akiva, Marry a husband, says Rabbi Akiva, who will see in you the most beautiful woman, the most beautiful man in the world. Nobody else is as beautiful as my spouse. You know where this is very easy to see? You ever watch parents talk about their children? You ever watch parents watch their children? In my eyes, my child is the most beautiful human being in the world. I see it that way. I do. Until the child starts talking. Then it's a whole different ballgame. But as long as the child can't speak, the child is cute and angelic. Right? Today on social media, people post pictures of their children all over the place. You look at someone else's child, some kids are more cute, some kids are less cute. A child is a child. But when I look at my own child, my child is the most beautiful human being that has ever graced this planet. That's the way I see it, and that's the way I should. Rabbi Akiva says, if you see another woman and she looks to you to be more beautiful than your wife, you don't need to get divorced. On an emotional level, you're already divorced. You're robbing yourself and your spouse of the beauty and the juice of marriage. That's point one. Point two. Marriage, of course, from a Torah perspective, is not just between two human beings. From the Torah's perspective, marriage is a mashal for relationships in general. The relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people is compared to a marriage. The relationship between ourselves and that which we have to accomplish in this world, our shlichus in this world, is compared to a marriage. The relationship between our own bodies and our own souls is compared to a marriage. The relationship we have with ourselves is, in many ways, is a marriage. And yet, at some point, the Torah tells us, at some point, sometimes we need to get divorced. It's true. And it's very difficult to know. When am I to stay in the position that I'm in and try to make it better? When am I to walk away? When am I to walk away from a relationship? When am I to walk away from a job? When am I to move to a different place in the world? When am I to change direction? When am I to change perspective? Or when am I to stay and continue making this work? How do I know? Difficult. Difficult sometimes. Sometimes it's clear. Sometimes it's difficult to know. And yet here as well, the Torah gives us perspective. Beis Shammai say, once you've been allotted, once you've been given, once you find yourself in a particular situation, Beis Shammai were tough people. Beis Shammai say, if you faced with a particular job, you fight, you do your best to do that job until it gets to a point where you can no longer stay. If you're halachically obligated to go, go. But if you're not halachically obligated to go, stay. Do what it takes to make it work until there's no other option. Beis Hillel say, no, you don't got to stay that long. You don't have to stay that long. Beis Hillel say, if it's causing you pain, if you're hurting, if you wake up in the morning and the thought of going to work or doing that particular job that day fills you with pain because somebody on the other end is intentionally hurting you, you may go, say Beis Hillel. And here comes Rabbi Akiva. And Rabbi Akiva teaches us perhaps the greatest lesson on perspective that a person can ever learn. Rabbi Akiva says, before you ask yourself to run, jump, hop, and skip, before you take off looking for 1,000 other things, let me ask you a question, says Rabbi Akiva. Are you truly seeing what's in front of you? If you're in a marriage in one form or another, are you seeing the person that you're married to? Or are you so busy being convinced that there's something or someone else out there? Are you so busy looking in a million different other places that you're not seeing the very thing that's staring you in the face? Are you missing out on the beauty? Are you missing out on the juice of life and marriage because something that's directly in front of your nose you're not looking at? You've got missing tile syndrome, convinced that life somewhere else is better. People like to say, and this is true, People like to say that nowadays we live in a disposable generation. Everything is disposable. Your phone doesn't work, you throw it out. Your car doesn't work, you throw it out. Your spouse doesn't work. I'm not going to finish that sentence. Your job doesn't work, off you go. You don't like this. People like to say, and there's truth to it. There's truth to it. We live in a disposable generation. People are running from one thing to the next. Wait a second, says Rabbi Akiva. You might be missing the very thing that's in front of you. And you know, my friends, I got 7 minutes left. Let's go back to the Pesukim for a minute. The Torah is giving us the mitzvah of divorce. But think how oddly, think how strangely the Torah articulates this mitzvah. Here's what the Torah says. A man and a woman get married. She no longer finds grace in his eyes. He divorces her. So she goes off and marries another man. The other man doesn't like her either, so he divorces her. And now the original couple want to get remarried. She wants to get married to the husband she was married to first. And the Torah says, may not. Why is the Torah using this as the platform for which to teach us the mitzvah of divorce? This is how you teach me divorce. She gets divorced from one man, she marries another man. She gets divorced from the second man, or the second man dies, and now she wants to get married to the original. This is the source for the concept of divorce. Why? I'll give you my own theory. I'll tell you why. Because the Torah is articulating here Rabbi Akiva's message. The Torah says, you're running away from something. Sometimes it's a spouse. Sometimes it's a location. Sometimes it's a job. Sometimes it's a habit. Sometimes it's a lifestyle. You're running away from a particular set of clothing. You're running away from something. Wait a second, says the Torah. Before you go, and there are scenarios in which you should, but before you run, I beg of you, says the Torah, think. Ask yourself honestly and clearly, from whom am I running and from what? Do I know what I'm walking away from? Do I see the beauty of the individual, of the one sitting in front of me? Or am I convinced that everyone and everything else is going to be more beautiful? That the grass is greener on the other side, as a wise man once said, because there's more fertilizer on the other side. And you all know what fertilizer is made out of. If you're not careful, says the Torah, I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're going to run somewhere else. And then you know what's going to happen? Guess what? Your issues will follow you somewhere else. And then you'll get divorced there too. And then you say to yourself, you know what I should do? I should go back to the original person that I was married to first time because it was better over there. And the Torah says, I'm not going to let you. Because this game has to end somewhere. At some point, you have to ask yourself, Rabbeinu Dehai Alma, from whom am I running and from what? Dr. Twersky likes to call this geographic therapy. People, he says, who come into his office and say, Rabbi Twersky, my life, I have this challenge and I have that challenge, and you know what the solution is? I need to move somewhere else. Motzo acheres noah heimeno, says Rabbi Akiva, you found something else to be more beautiful than your own wife. You found something in someone else to be better. Rabbi Akiva says, you don't need to get divorced. You need to get married. You don't need to separate yourself from that which you're trying to run away from. You need to connect to it for the first time in your life. You don't need a new location. You don't need a new set of clothing. You don't need a new phone or a new pair of glasses. You don't need to separate from anything. You need to learn what it means to connect. And yes, Rabbi Akiva was the authority on this. Rabbi Akiva knew what it meant to sacrifice for a spouse. Rabbi Akiva watched his wife lose everything for his own sake. Rabbi Akiva knew what it was like as a 40-year-old man to sit down with humility, with little children, and learn Because Rabbi Akiva understood that if you don't know something, you go and you learn what it is that you have to learn. And he did it. And he became the greatest man of the generation with 24,000 students. And yes, eventually Rabbi, this is a Shiur for a different day, but eventually Rabbi Akiva, may Hashem protect us, lost those 24,000 students and went and found more students. Rabbi Akiva understood that you look in marriage for the greatness of your spouse. I dare say, many of us are guilty of this in one form or another. Sometimes the very thing we seek is staring right in front of us. Sometimes what it is that we're convinced we'll find in all sorts of different locations is already there. Sometimes we're running, and we're convinced we're running from everything else when we're really running from ourselves. Afilu motza acheres noah yemena, says Rabbi Akiva. If you find someone else to be, something else to be more beautiful than that which is in front of you, ask yourself before you go, am I appreciating what Hashem has given me? Am I appreciating the brachas Hashem has placed before me? Do I know what I'm running from? Do I know what I'm running to? Or am I just going to follow the pattern of the Torah of running from one thing to the next, when eventually, I'm going to end up right back where I started and say, oi, I should have appreciated it from the beginning. I should have appreciated my original husband, my original wife, my original spouse. I should have seen the beauty in them. I say this because we're living, my time is up, but we're living in unprecedented times, my friend. I don't need to tell you this. It's out of hand. We're living at a time where we're barely recognizing the world around us. Things are changing so rapidly. And everybody is asking themselves, what do we have to hold on to? Perhaps it's time to hold on to the things that we sometimes take for granted. Perhaps it's time for us to look at the thing, not at the missing tile, not at those lifestyle habits that have been taken away from us, but at those things that we could have taken advantage of so long ago. Perhaps it's time to appreciate our own health, the health of our loved ones and those closest to us. Perhaps it's time for us to reassess how we use and spend our time. Perhaps it's time for us not to take things for granted. On the deepest of all levels, what Rabbi Akiva is saying is, if you see another woman who's more beautiful than your own wife, you know what the problem is? The problem is that you were looking somewhere else in the first place. Wo guckst du? Where are you looking? Where are you going? Where are you running? Look at that which is in front of you, or I dare say, look into yourself. All the beauty we seek, all the health, everything we have, everything we're convinced we may be running to, we may already be in possession of, and we may be taking it for granted. May Hashem bless us all with a good gebenched Shiur and a Akiva v'chasima tova, a year filled with nachas and brachas and simchas. Please, God, an end to this insanity, where life as we know it can return to normal. But even as it does, let's never forget the lessons that we learned. Let's never forget the months that Hashem forced us all to stop running through life and remember that which is truly important and never take it for granted. Have a wonderful Shabbos.